Okay, now let's have a look at the criticisms of the unbalanced growth theory. Just a brief look. So, one of the main criticisms is, of course, that inadequate attention is paid to the composition, direction, and timing of unbalanced growth. So, while Hirschman is convinced and also convinces the readers that a deliberate imbalancing of the economy is what is good for the development of the economy, what degree of imbalance, where to imbalance, and how much to imbalance so that the growth is accelerated. These details have not been given their due attention. Okay. Another criticism is that it neglects resistances. By this, what we mean is he talks about how deliberate unbalancing can have the effect of generating stimulus to investments in several other related sectors, right? But what he neglects is these underdeveloped countries, there are some inherent resistances to change. So there is resistance to change, there is a traditional or a negative attitude towards business, hostility, and maybe even opposition that may arise when you talk about a deliberate unbalancing strategy being followed. And these resistances in terms of attitudes, in terms of people's attitudes, in terms of their reluctance to accept change and so on, can actually deter economic development. Another point that they say is that the pressures and tensions that are created in the growth process due to this deliberate unbalancing may be a bit too much for these economies to handle in a peaceful manner. So if the government decides to unbalance the economy but the general population at large is not in agreement, it can lead to chaos and to disturbance, to even civil war in many cases. That often happens when what the government and what the people want are not the same. Next criticism is the lack of basic facilities. So you're talking about underdeveloped countries or less developed countries, and you're talking about strategic investments being made in certain selected sectors, but all of this requires technical personnel, the related know-how, availability of the correct type and nature of raw materials, availability of basic facilities like power, transport, even factors like inadequate domestic or foreign market for the goods produced by these underdeveloped countries. All of these can be obstacles that could spoil the entire development policy and plan. Lack of factor mobility is another problem that is there in the less developed countries. Shifting resources from one sector to another is tough, be it labor, be it other important resources, and this lack of factor mobility can again hamper or deter development. Another criticism pointed out against the unbalanced growth strategy is that this strategy is meant to be implemented in less developed countries which are already poor in terms of resources, in terms of capital, and so on. So when large dose of investment is made in certain strategic sectors, the incomes of the people dependent on those sectors would definitely increase. And as these incomes increase, it would lead to rise in demand, especially for consumer goods relative to their supply. So if you say you are unbalancing the economy via investments in basic and heavy industries, right? These are more capital goods sector, right? But the demand that is increasing within the economy will be for consumer goods. So if these consumer goods which are being demanded are scarce, this would build an upward pressure, put an upward pressure on their prices. So shortages of this sort, especially when you're unbalancing the economy, shortages in one sector relative to another sector can have severe inflationary impact on the economy. So in unbalanced, deliberate or otherwise, in unbalanced economies, it becomes very difficult to control prices because of supply bottlenecks, because of production bottlenecks, and so on. The next criticism is that the entire analysis that Hirschman makes is not based on data related to underdeveloped countries. Because in underdeveloped countries, the social overhead capital, or the SOC, is still not fully developed. So it is not based on data related to underdeveloped countries, so it cannot be totally reliable. Finally, Paul Streeton also talks about how Hirschman puts too much emphasis on investment decisions and maximizing all possible investment decisions. But when it comes to an economy that is trying to develop itself, there are many other decisions to be made. There are administrative decisions, managerial decisions, policy level decisions that need to be made, which have not been paid attention to in the unbalanced growth strategy. So, as a conclusion or a summing up of the unbalanced growth theory, most economists agree that it is a much more realistic approach than the balanced growth theory as a strategy for the underdeveloped countries. The discussion of forward and backward linkages, as well as the benefits of last stage investments in last stage production and so on, is very useful in terms of policy suggestions for the underdeveloped countries. The stress on import substitution led industrialization and export promotion has been very well received, because this is a strategy that has been practically applied by many countries, which includes Russia, communist Russia, and even India. So to a great degree, one could say it has been a success. Not perfect success in the case of India, but in case of Russia, it has been quite efficiently carried out. Hirschman personally, in his theory, preferred a mixed economy. He was not really of the opinion that development process should be led solely by the state, as was in the case of communist Russia. Nor did he believed that the private sector alone could lead the entire development process. So Hirschman was very firm believer that uh, development process needs a mixed economy where both the public and the private sector have their own respective responsibilities towards development.